Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the life of the Buddha, about some of the basic ideas in Buddhism, and then about the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha taught in his very first discourse after gaining awakening, that is, after becoming a Buddha. Now, the person we call the Buddha, let's begin with that word Buddha for a moment. Some people think of that as a name, that he's called Buddha. That's not true. The word Buddha is an epithet. It literally means the guy who woke up. It comes from the Sanskrit word bodhi, which means to wake up. Perfectly ordinary term. It's what you do when the alarm clock goes off. You bodhi. And Buddha is just the past participle, the guy who woke up. He actually had a name. His name was Siddhartha Gautama, and we can call him Sid for short if we want. Helps to kind of dispel some of the artificial reverence. He lived in about the 5th century before the Common Era, as I said a few moments ago, and he was a prince in a small kingdom that is now in southern Nepal that was called Kapilavastu. And he was a member of a particular clan called the Shakya clan. Many people refer to him as Shakyamuni Buddha. Shakya is the clan of which he was a member. The word Muni means sage, so that epithet Shakyamuni means the sage of the Shakya clan. Anyway, enough for names. As we understand from his biography, he left home as a shramana fairly early. And let's pause on that idea for a moment. What is a shramana? In India at that time, and indeed in India today, a perfectly reasonable thing for a person to do late in life is to leave home and become a wandering mendicant and to try to really come to understand the nature of existence. You can think about it as kind of 1968 gone berserk. This happens all the time in contemporary India, but was very common in classical India. It's something you do at the end of your life. The only thing that was unusual about Shakyamuni Buddha, about Sid, is that he left home very early, when he was about 30 years old. He left the palace in which he was a prince, left his wife and his young son behind, and went out to try to solve a problem. And the problem that he went to try to solve was a very profound problem, the problem of why there is suffering in the world. And in fact, as we will see in a little while, the most profound insight of all, perhaps, in Buddhism is the idea that suffering is such a huge problem and that we can't understand the meaning of life without trying to solve that problem. As the story of his life has it, he spent about 3 years wandering around northern India and becoming the student or the disciple of a whole number of teachers who were teaching in various towns, teaching in the forest. And as the story has it, from each teacher he learned something, but he was a quick student, and within a very short time he exceeded what that teacher had to teach. And so he went from teacher to teacher, and he finally ran across these 4 other folks who were like him, young folks trying to find the meaning of life. They didn't start a hippie commune. Instead, what they did was they started practicing severe austerities, lots of self-mortification, starvation, and subjecting themselves to extremes of heat and cold, the kinds of things that they thought might finally lead to a spiritual breakthrough. But at some point, Sid realized that this doesn't lead to spiritual breakthrough at all. What it leads to is a loss of health, a lot of hunger, thirst, and discomfort, and that doesn't add up to brilliance. So he abandoned these companions and decided to try to find another route. He was near a small town called Bodh Gaya, and he went and sat on the shore of a river, and a young woman from the town came and offered him some milk, some porridge. He had a good meal. He thought about what to do next. And what he did was he sat down under a tree. You can see that tree now. You can go to that tree, the holiest pilgrimage spot for Buddhists. We call it the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. He sat down under that tree, and he said to himself, I'm not going to arise until I have attained full awakening, until I am a Buddha. Note that before that, he's not a Buddha. He's just Siddhartha Gautama, the wandering mendicant, who's having a lot of trouble figuring out the meaning of life. So, he sits down under this tree in the evening, and he begins to meditate. And as the story goes, at dawn, he suddenly realized the fundamental nature of reality. He realized what the meaning of life was. He touched the ground, asked the earth to be his witness, and recognized that he was now fully awakened, that he was a Buddha. That's where Buddhism begins, with the awakening of Siddhartha Gautama under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya. Now, he realized that what he had understood was something very profound, something very difficult to communicate. And at first he was very reluctant to teach. And he spent a lot of time simply thinking about it, contemplating it, wandering around in Bodh Gaya to try to figure out what to do. Now, legendarily, we're told that the god Brahma came down and told him to go teach. We have no idea what actually led him to embark upon a teaching career. But at some point, he decided he was able to communicate his insight. And through the kind of network of wandering Shramanas, through the Shramana grapevine, he heard that his erstwhile colleagues in austerities were now hanging out and practicing their austerities in a little deer park outside of the ancient city of Varanasi in a place called Sarnath. And so he decided, maybe I'll find them and explain to them the fundamentals of what I've understood. And he did. He walked to Sarnath, it's a couple of 100 miles, found his erstwhile companions. At first they said, let's not pay any attention to Sid. The guy's looking too fat, looking too healthy. He's obviously given up on serious spiritual work. Then they kind of noticed that he was glowing. He looked a little bit too happy. And they listened to him. He said, I have to tell you something. I'm now a Buddha. I've been awakened. And at Sarnath, he gave them his first public teaching, the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. We call it the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. That is the discourse that turned the wheel of Dharma. And in that first teaching, he enunciated all of the fundamental principles of Buddhism. For the next 45 years, he wandered all over North India, gathering more and more and more students, hundreds, perhaps thousands of students. He ordained them as monks, and they became the beginning of the Buddhist Sangha, the order of Buddhist monks, and are those who have since transmitted Buddhism for all of the centuries since. That's a brief summary of the life of the Buddha and where this all came from. But now I'd like to spend some time with you talking about the fundamental principles of Buddhism that the Buddha announced in that Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, in that discourse of the turning of the wheel given in Sarnath. A spot now, by the way, marked by a beautiful old stupa. You can visit that spot, a very beautiful place to go. So we're going to talk about three fundamental ideas that animate all of Buddhist philosophy. I should emphasize, Buddhism has become an enormously diverse family of traditions. There are differences between Buddhism as it's understood in Sri Lanka from Buddhism as it's understood in Tibet or Japan, or for that matter, parts of the United States. But I'm going to talk now about ideas that are common to all Buddhist traditions. The first will be the idea of impermanence, and we'll understand that in a very deep way, selflessness, and interdependence, or dependent origination. These are three ideas that are closely tied with one another, but for analytic purposes, we're going to treat them one at a time. The Buddha recognized that all phenomena around us, all phenomena, are impermanent. We've encountered that idea before, but the Buddha pushed it a little bit more deeply than some of the people we've encountered before. He divided impermanence into two different levels. There's gross impermanence, which is the impermanence we observe around ourselves all the time. Once I was a young boy, then I was a young man, now you see I'm kind of an old guy, soon I'm going to be dead. We see a tree that is a sapling, and finally it's a big tree. Nations come and go, the kind of impermanence that we see all the time. Things arise, they endure for a while, and they pass away. But the Buddha emphasized that this gross impermanence is undergirded by what he called a subtle impermanence. That it's not that things change slowly over time, as I've been saying, but everything is changing constantly, moment to moment. Nothing remains in its current state for more than an instant. As I speak to you, atoms of my body are evaporating or sublimating into the air. Bits of my hair are falling. Other parts of my body are growing and developing. Cells are being replaced. From one moment to another, I am a different thing. And that's true of everything in the universe, constantly changing in levels that we can't perceive, but that have to be there if gross impermanence is to be a reality. And for that reason, the Buddha said, we need to think about entities around us not as stable things, Because for